Hey listeners, this is a rerun, or as I like to call it, a TAC Reload preamble. You might be hearing more of these. And I'm just going to be real with you. I've been doing this podcast for a lot of years. I've been doing it full time for about 2. I was hoping to grow it into a full-time income. I said I'd give it a year, and I've given it 2. I've cashed out retirement accounts. I've cashed out Bitcoin. Lived off of savings while trying to grow the podcast, and it has grown by God's grace by leaps and bounds, but it has not yet become a full-time income. There's a time to spend and a time to save, Ecclesiastes says. So I will be taking on some private contracting work, Handguns will travel, which means, especially by God's grace, pretty soon I'll be entering in some pretty strenuous training as far as the schedule goes, so you're probably going to get some more reruns. If you don't go back and listen to old episodes, maybe they'll be new to you. But I just wanted to give you a heads up and be real with you as to what's going on. As Ecclesiastes says, there's a time to spend and a time to save. Hopefully we'll build back up some savings and still be able to get out a podcast pretty regularly. I've been doing about a podcast a day for a long time. A lot of podcasts only do a podcast a week. So hopefully you will bear with me. I will try and get the patrons more special insider-only content as they get already. I don't want to leave them out to dry. They're the ones that step up and support the podcast, and I really hope that they feel they're getting their money's worth. But if not, no hard feelings. I will try and keep up on the Patreon stuff, but you guys may see a little bit of a drop-off, at least periodically, depending on schedule, on new episodes. You'll still get new episodes, maybe just not one a day. So enjoy this Tactical Reload episode. Well, hello there, gunfighters. Saddle up for Gunfighter Life, where we talk about guns and gunfighting the right way with Almighty God at the center, Judeo-Christian values, and real-world first-hand experience. Truck guns. That's what we're going to talk about today, truck guns. For today, a little bit about the why, and handguns for truck guns. See, I did an episode a while ago. It was a very popular episode. You can go back and search for it, just called Truck Guns. If you search Gunfighter Life and Truck Guns, if you want the old school episode, you can get that one. But it was a popular episode, and I got requests for it. It's been brought up as a favorite episode, and I thought, how can I do this, but do it fresh? I think I'm going to do it as a series. So make sure you're subscribed and following the show. If you've listened, if this is not your first rodeo here, you've probably heard the bio. I'll do a quick abbreviated version and then expound a little bit on how that relates to vehicles and guns. U.S. Marine Corps combat veteran. After my combat tours, I also served as an urban warfare instructor for the United States Marine Corps under Mojave Viper. Also served in the U.S. Army, both full-time and part-time National Guard, primary infantry, but also served in cavalry. I should say my MOS in the Marine Corps is also infantry, specialized infantry. Also law enforcement, LAPD. I worked regular assignments and more specialized assignments. I've been a private contractor for a 3-letter government agency I won't specify. I've been the commander of a tactical team to stop active shooters. That was our prime directive in a large metropolitan area. Professional gunfighters there to stop active shooters. I was blessed to be the commander of that. There's a few other things in my bio, but I think for vehicle guns, truck guns, that's mostly what I'm going to talk about. I may bring some other stuff into the episode. But as you might imagine, in the Marine Corps, both in actual service and, well, I guess still actual service, but in my time as a warfare instructor, urban warfare for a Mojave Viper, you might imagine there was quite a bit of convoy operations and urban operations having to do with vehicles and getting out with weapons and using weapons in an urban environment and in conjunction with vehicles, mounted, dismounted. Also, as you might imagine, law enforcement. Rolling around in a vehicle, you're armed, both with handguns and long guns of various types, as the commander of a tactical team in a large metropolitan area. Sometimes we'd have to go in pretty hot and heavy to an area where there's a threat, mount it and dismount quickly. So I've got a little bit more than hypothetical experience in this arena. That's one of the reasons I do the podcast. There's a lot of gun podcasts out there, and I don't want to take away from them, but a lot of it is conjecture. I try and help you guys out with real-world first-hand experience. With that, let's get into Truck Guns Part 1, the handgun. Now, hopefully you are listening and you're an avid concealed carrier. Hopefully you conceal carry a handgun day to day. Not sometimes, not when you're going to a barbecue, when you're going to the gun store, but actually day to day. When you go to your job, when you go to the gas station. I hope, I really do, that you carry a firearm on you, on your person. That is like part of your line 1 gear, the part of the gear that should be on you. Should be like Bible, check. Wallet, check. Phone, check. EDC knife, check. Fighting handgun, check. Spare mag, check. Tourniquet, check. Should be part of what you carry. I'm going to start as that. Now, I've said this before, a handgun is a compromise. I've been blessed by God, and He's got me through a lot of sticky situations to be a professional gunfighter most of my adult life. If He said you have to get into a gunfight today to save somebody else's life, many people's lives, I'm not going to choose a handgun unless there's some weird criteria like I'm crawling in a tunnel. But I'm almost certainly going to choose a shotgun or a rifle, depending on the situation. Handguns are not a great fighting tool. Handguns are a thing that we carry because we can have them on us. Because you're probably not going to the post office or Walmart or the 7-Eleven with an AR-15 on your back. They are a compromise. I encourage you, as I do, to most of the time carry a full-size fighting handgun. However, I know that most people don't. From the replies I get on this podcast, most people carry a compact, subcompact, micro carry gun. So not only is that a compromise far less effective than a long gun, that's a compromise of a compromise. Because even if you're shooting the same box of ammo, if I give you Spear Gold Dot G2 147 grain, and you shoot 25 of those rounds through a chronograph through your Micro 9 with a 2-inch barrel and then a full-size fighting handgun with a 5-inch barrel, even though they're out of the same box, you're going to get more velocity, more terminal performance out of the full-size fighting handgun. Not just that, you get the added benefit of a longer sight radius. It's also easier to clear malfunctions because you have more purchase area. You get usually a more full grip on the gun. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. You can't cheat that. And generally, unless the gun just doesn't fit you or something, a full-size handgun is going to recoil less for a given caliber than a smaller handgun. For all those reasons and a few others, I encourage you to carry a full-size fighting handgun. But again, a lot of people don't. A lot of people are going to carry that micro, compact, subcompact genre. If that is you, you might look at a full-size fighting handgun in your truck for a truck gun. And I'm talking full-size, and I think full-size is a 5-inch barrel. Talking an STI 2011, a Glock 34, something in that size range, a full size, a M17. Now this is the reason I really like, if you're going to carry a gun and you're not going to carry a full size, carry a compact or a subcompact, because a lot of times you get magazine interchangeability. For instance, if you carry a Glock 26 and your truck gun is a Glock 34, you can use those mags. You can use the bigger mags in the smaller gun, and there's mag one-way interchangeability. If you step down to a Glock 43, then the Glock 43 mags don't work in anything else, and unless it's like a 43X, the standard Glock mags are not going to work in that small gun. The same with if you carry a subcompact SIG 320. Your M17 mags will work in that. It will not work in a SIG 365. The whole point of those micros, they're thin, which means they can't take a regular double-stack magazine. So that might skew you to carrying like a Glock 26 or a 320 subcompact as opposed to a 365 or a Glock 43 or even a Glock 42. But either way, if you're doing that, it kind of makes sense because If you're carrying that gun, it should mean that you really like that platform, because that's the gun you're trusting your life to get the bigger version. So if you're carrying that 320 subcompact, to have a big version of it, even a competition version of it, because you're not concealing it. Fast and accurate is an advantage here. And accessorize it if you want. Carry this gun ready in your vehicle with a light on it if you want, with the extended mag if you want, with a good quality optic if you want. Again, you're not concealing it. But again, my primary thing is if you carry a compact, subcompact, carry a bigger version of that gun. That makes the most sense. But that may not work for you. Let's say you normally carry a Glock 42. That's my wife's go-to carry gun. Not to say you're effeminate if you carry a Glock 42. But the point of that is that if you carry that Glock 42 and 380, you're probably not going to get a giant 380. You're probably going to get a different caliber altogether. And even if you got a bigger 380, still not great. So interchangeability of pretty much anything is out the window at that point. So if you're not concerned with like a bigger version of a similar gun and you're stepping up in caliber, you may want to step up even bigger, right? You may want to step up to a 45 or a 10 millimeter. I'm a big fan of the 9 millimeter. I switched to it way back in the day when everybody thought you had to have a 40 or a 45, and I ran the gambit and I did a bunch of shooting and I did my own testing, and I realized for most things, for me, on the street, I should mention as a cop I worked regular assignments and more specialized assignments. And I worked some of the nastiest streets in the country. By God's grace, he got me through that in one piece. Not because I deserved it, but because he was looking out for me. And I realized if my life was going to depend on it, and this was way back before 9 was the new hotness, back when they thought you had to have a 40 or 45, I realized that the ability to get quick, accurate, repeatable hits on target generally favored the 9 millimeter. That was the best balance. However, for a vehicle gun, a truck gun, you may decide you want a 10 millimeter or a 45. One, because there's a limit to how much weight I want to carry on my hip as a cop. Even as a cop, I did not like the giant gun with the giant flashlight on it. I tried that and I quickly went away from it. It's kind of pregnant. The giant big holsters can get caught up when you're trying to get into and out of vehicles. It's just more than I wanted to carry. There's a firepower versus mobility thing there. But if you look at it as a gun that's going to stay in your truck and not on your body most of the time, you get a full-size 10 millimeter or 45 and you hang a big heavy light on it and you put the heavy extended mag in it. You go with like a tungsten guide rod and do a bunch of stuff to make it more shootable. Then of all the places for an urban gun, this is where I think it makes a lot of sense for a 45 or a 10 millimeter. Now, I'm not saying that's a better choice than 9, but of all the places I could look to justify that, this would be one where you might want to consider it. Maybe you want the FNX 45, the Tactical Wheaties box, as it's lovingly referred to, with extended mags and a giant light hanging off of it. Again, because that's not your everyday carry gun. And those rounds are kind of known for penetrating well. Like 230 grain 45 ACP, a good like hard cast 10 millimeter, those are known for being good penetrators. Ammo selection for this is very important. You could get a poor load in a 45 that penetrates less than a good load in a 9 millimeter. But if we compare apples to apples and fair to fair, then I think you might look at this. Either way, if it's a vehicle handgun, no longer in that compromise of a compromise. Yes, you're compromised in that you only have a handgun. But at least it's not a baby handgun. At least it's not a compromise of a compromise. At least you're not taking the leap from stepping down from a rifle or a shotgun to a handgun and then stepping it, neutering it even further and cutting half the barrel off. At least you're dealing with a full-size fighting handgun. Red dot optic, light, all the stuff. And then that raises a couple of questions. How does one do this? How does one carry this? Well, that really is very individualistic based on you, based on your vehicle, how much you're comfortable and where you're comfortable leaving it in your vehicle. Because I tell you one thing, this shouldn't take the place of a carry gun. Because let's say you live somewhere where you want to, or just sometimes it's mandated in that you are supposed to carry a vehicle like locked in your trunk with the ammunition separate in a locked container, the gun in a locked container and the ammunition in a separate place, like in your trunk in an inaccessible part of your vehicle. Well, that's usually not going to do you much good in most civilian defensive gun encounters. There could be a scenario where you see crime afoot and you have the time to get all that together, but generally you're going to want the gun quickly. So it shouldn't take the place of your EDC gun. This is an addition to. So where should you carry that gun? Where you can access it quickly. In your vehicle. And you've got to figure out those solutions. There's solutions with magnets. There's solutions with mounting it beside your seat. A center console where the gun is always oriented in a proper direction so you can reach in and grab it, where you don't have to wonder which way the gun is oriented. You also may consider putting it in a good holster that has some kind of way to attach to you. I'm not a big fan of EDCing with a paddle holster, but this is a case where a paddle holster may make a lot of sense. A good quality Kydex paddle holster, if you don't know, a paddle holster is like a giant piece of Kydex that goes inside your pants. You can just slip it on over a belt and over pants. That would make a lot of sense for this if you want to get like a light bearing holster with a paddle that whatever pants and belt you're wearing, hopefully as a man you generally wear pants with a belt, you can slip that in there. And then if you have to leave the vehicle for whatever scenario it is, you have a way to carry the gun with it not being in your hands. So you may consider something like a paddle holster, or you may consider some kind of holster that slips on or has some kind of male-female attachment. And there are holsters like this, I like to run those, where you can detach one and attach the other. Like a quick detach rotating system. So that if you're carrying your regular size gun and you want to switch to a different gun, you literally just do the quick detach, put the new gun on, and you're ready to rock and roll. If it doesn't take the same mags, you may look at a similar system. They do make mag pouches that can clip on your belt or that have a similar paddle system where you slip them on so that you have this gun and at least one spare mag. You might as well have several in your vehicle because you're not carrying them. That's one way to do it. And if you have to dismount with the gun still stowed for whatever reason, you have to leave your vehicle, it breaks down, you are in civil unrest or rioting and looting, they are literally destroying vehicles, and sooner or later they're just going to be at your vehicle, so you might as well ditch it and bug out on foot. And you want a way to have that gun, maybe throw a coat over it, but have it ready and accessible. That's probably your best bet. And also you can keep it in, let's say, the center console in that Kydex holster with the trigger safely protected, hopefully with the muzzle safely protected and oriented in a proper manner. That's one solution. Another one could be something we used and was often used in law enforcement and tactical operations, and that's the bailout bag. You may decide you want some kind of bailout bag. Now you can go uber tactical if it's hidden, or you can go very conservative gray man, something that looks like, let's say a fly fishing bag or an old gym bag, but it has all your tactical gear in it. Or you can go with a tactical kit with purpose-built, magazine pouches and stuff, and do what I would call urban camouflage, like throw an old jacket over top of it. Or throw it inside a bigger, old, beat-up-looking gym bag you can get at Goodwill if you don't have one, and throw some dirty socks on top of it, literally, and put your tactical bag inside of it so you can grab it out of there, and people looking in your vehicle aren't going to think there's anything in there but a dirty gym bag. But you have your bailout kit. Maybe bailout kit should be its own episode. Maybe it will be. Let me know. If you're listening on Spotify, there's a thing on there to ask me a question. You can say, hey, I'd like a bailout bag episode. I'd like to know what that entails, because I'm not going to do all that entails here. Or you can go to Patreon. Now, I would be very humbled and blessed if you want to support the podcast and become a patron. However, even if you don't, you can go to the Patreon page. There should be a link in the show notes. You can scroll through. Most of that stuff is just for patrons, but there's an open post that says questions in big red letters. You can ask me a question on there. About this, about truck guns, about whatever. But if you want that, let me know. But anyway, getting back to the bailout bag. So you have your full-size fighting handgun in there, oriented in such a manner that you can reach in and grab it and you're ready to rock and roll. You might consider some kind of sling bag. The advantage of the sling bag is if you have the bug out bag, you can throw it on your back and the sling bag can go around front. And you can have it unzipped so that nobody knows what's in there, but you can reach in and you have access to that full-size fighting handgun. I would still have it in a holster. Even if the holster, you have it rigged, and there's many ways to do this, so you rig the holster so it stays in the bag when you go to pull it out. But just for the protection of the gun and beating it around, I would have it in the bag in a holster, but you have it oriented in there so you can reach in and grab it when it's slung the way that you want it slung, and like anything else, you got to train with it. Don't be an Amazonian, meaning don't just buy a bunch of cool tactical kit and throw it in your car with your Gucci gun in it, and then think you're ready for season 1 of The Walking Dead to commence in real life. That's a fantasy. You have to train with your kit. Anyway, you got your gun, you got your bailout bag, you have, again, a few spare mags, maybe even throw in a whole extra box of ammunition. The other stuff that goes in a bailout bag, a tourniquet. Anyway, you get the idea. Perhaps, depending on your vehicle, you can squeeze that in between your passenger seat and the center console so that you can reach over and grab it. And also hide it by like maybe throwing a jacket over it so that most people will just think you have your jacket there. It's another good way to accomplish this. So, to recap this, a handgun is a compromise. It's not as effective unless there's some weird scenario, some situational thing, because, everything is situationally dependent. But in general, and in a vast general sense, long guns are better. We're going to get into long guns for the truck guns, God willing. But a handgun is a compromise. A small handgun is a compromise of a compromise. If you're going to carry a handgun for a vehicle gun, make it a full-size handgun. Don't get so big and ridiculous that you can't drive it fast, but a full-size fighting handgun. Again, I carry a full-size fighting handgun day to day, but I don't generally carry one with a light because it makes the whole system very pregnant. But again, if it's not on you, go nuts with the tactical light on there with the extended magazine, a tungsten guide rod, a big optic, right? Because I generally carry a more compact optic. But there's no reason to for this because you're not concealing it on your person most of the time. And if you are, just don't want a big jacket. But a big full-size fighting handgun. Again, recapping, it makes a lot of sense to carry a bigger version if you carry a compact or subcompact. You carry a Glock 19, carry a Glock 34 or a Glock 17L. You should be fairly familiar with the platform if you're trusting your life to it and carrying it, and they're generally more shootable in a full-size fighting handgun, so why not go that route? It just makes sense. You carry a 320 compact or subcompact, carry a M17 or carry the full-size Legion of that, the X5 of the 320 version with a bunch of extended mags. Or, again, if you carry a J-frame revolver, or you carry something like that, a 380, where you're just not going to get a bigger version of that, realistically. I mean, you could get a little bit bigger. You could carry like a PPK, which I think would be a horrible choice for this. But, anyway, if you're not going to do that, you may just look at a big standard full-size 9mm, or you, again, I'm not saying this is better than a 9, but of all the places where it makes sense and where they do become fairly shootable, you might get a big, heavy 45 or 10mm. There is some ballistic advantage there. especially when you get into a big, heavy, full-size handguns with lights, because that's basically attaching a big, heavy weight on the end of your gun, which helps keep the muzzle down. As you may have noticed, since I didn't mention it, I'm not a fan of the 40, but if you're that guy, run the 40. It is what it is. Also, 357 SIG would be a decent choice for this, especially in a full-size, longer barrel or even extended barrel, long slide. You're going to get even crazier velocities in that. Also very important for this, and I guess this is not a recap, I should have mentioned it. Really, really think about your ammo selection. Not all ammunition is created equal. For this, you might really look to a good quality bonded, and there's different ways to bond bullets. There's mechanical bonding, there's chemical bonding, but a good bonded bullet, and look for something that says barrier blind, something that will penetrate windshield glass well, that will penetrate sheet metal well. Because if this is a truck gun, there is a good chance you are going to have to shoot through your vehicle and or into somebody else's vehicle. If you've never done any kind of tactical training where you shoot targets inside vehicles, where you shoot through windshields, you shoot into cars or out of cars, you'll know that can wreak havoc on a bullet. This is not a place to cut corners with the ammo. I'd rather have a just run-of-the-mill vanilla gun without all the Guccification, and with good premium quality bonded ammo, good barrier blind ammo, than that Gucci gun with a poor quality of ammo. Ammo selection is important. Do your due diligence. Don't just look for a good expanding defensive ammo. That is good, but look for a good expanding defensive ammo that is bonded, that does well, and is proven in barriers, especially auto glass and sheet metal. Because again, it's pretty likely if this is your truck gun and you have to use it, that you're going to have to shoot out of your vehicle and or into somebody else's vehicle or barriers, right? That just makes sense. A lot of law enforcement top quality ammo will have this, especially the newer generation stuff. So again, ammo selection, important, muy importante. Have a system, and I don't care what it is. I don't care if it's a paddle holster and a paddle flap magazine in your center console with a jacket wrapped around it to keep it oriented in the proper manner so you can reach in and grab it. Or if you want to go the bailout bag route and tuck it in between your seat and your center console with a jacket over it, have a way to get it quickly, both to get it and get it out of your vehicle quickly. Because that's one thing about like convoys and urban operations. You may go a long time, especially as a civilian. Hopefully you go the rest of your life and you don't have something go wrong. But when something goes wrong, it can a lot of times cascade and snowball very quickly. So you need to be ready to act. You can't reach over and grab your gun or grab the container and get it out of your vehicle with the other things that you need. Then you may just have to leave it behind. Because the whole point of all of this, right, is to save your life and other people's lives. If it's going to kill you to access your gun, then that gun is not accessible. So whatever system you use, have a way to access it quickly, if you legally can. And as I aforementioned, I want this to be a series. This will be part 1. So on the ideal truck gun handgun, it's probably going to be a far more effective handgun than the handgun that you carry for CCW, unless you carry a big gun like this. But for most people, it's going to be a more effective handgun. That's the plus. There's also a couple of other advantages to the handgun, especially if you are the driver. Riding shotgun is a term for a reason, because of the shotgun, which we'll get into in later episodes. But if you're driving with the steering wheel in the way and the distraction of, driving, the handgun gives the advantage of one-handed operation. It gives the advantage of, if you learn certain techniques, like close quarters and CQB type shooting and the car technique, which is a valid technique in a small niche application, and this might be one of those, you can actually shoot while driving as a driver. You can maneuver pretty well inside the vehicle with a handgun, more so than you would be able to with most long guns. We'll get into PDWs and things like that in later episodes. But those are some big advantages. The big disadvantages is it's still a handgun. And as I alluded to in the prelude getting into the handguns, a handgun is not as effective as a long gun. It's just not. You're not, even with a big full-size fighting handgun, unless you go with something ridiculous, like a single-shot .22 rifle, right? It's not as effective as a long gun. It's just not. It's not as effective for terminal performance, for range, for shootability. So that's the other side of that coin there. A handgun is no substitute in the vast majority of situations for a long gun, either a rifle/carbine or a shotgun or even a PCC or a PDW, personal defense weapon. Hopefully we'll cover all of those in future episodes. So make sure that you do a tactical assault on that subscribe button, that follow button. Make sure you're following, liking, subscribing the show if you want more on truck guns. Hopefully you enjoyed this episode. Hopefully you found it germane to your life and useful. If you did and you want to support, consider scrolling down. There's a Venmo link if you just want to drop me $1 or $2. I'd be humbled and blessed by it. If you want to support the show and become kind of part of the tribe, if you're a regular listener and you want to support the show, you can become a patron. There's a Patreon link in the show note. You can become part of an insider chat. We talk about Bible verses and defense and philosophy and a lot of gun stuff. If you want to be part of that with some like-minded good men that I'm humbled to be in a group chat with, that's part of it. There's also insider-only content, commercial-free content, early content, all on Patreon. Also, that same Patreon link, even if you don't want to become a patron and you want to ask me a question, you can ask me a question on there. I would like to hear from you. Anyway, with that, that's going to bring us to start wrapping up this edition of Gunfighter Life. Making godly men strong and strong men godly. I'm humbled to serve you today. The tactical tip. Whether or not you have a giant weapon-mounted light on your gun, you still want a handheld light. There are things that you want to illuminate that you don't want to point a gun at. Part of your EDC, I think, should be a good EDC flashlight. That's not the tactical tip. The tactical tip is a really simple thing, and I got it from somebody else's channel. It may have been Survival Dispatch. It may have been somebody else. I honestly don't know, but it's a genius idea. The prelude to this, before I saw that, I would often just have a small lanyard that I would make attached to my EDC flashlight, so that if I have the flashlight in my hand and I have to quickly do a tack reload or a speed reload, I can just have it on my hand and then do the reload and then grab the flashlight again without having to drop it, put it on my armpit, put it in my teeth, which are all tactics you'll learn in tactical training. But if you have the lanyard, you can just drop it. Well, this takes it to the next level. You can buy a cheap piece of like bungee cord, a shock cord, stuff that goes inside tent poles, and you can make a lanyard and you can loop it around the backside of your hand so that you can literally have your hands open and free. You can fight, you can punch with it, you can be walking with it in your hand, and it's going to stay in your hand. Genius. You just wrap it from the back part of the flashlight where the clip is to the front part of the flashlight for most EDC flashlights and clip it on and it stays in your hand. Genius. Anyway, that's your tactical tip of the day. Your tactical verse of the day. I'm going to read starting in Exodus 23 for the tactical verse of the day. You shall not circulate a false report. Do not put your hand with the wicked to be an unrighteous witness. You shall not follow a crowd to do evil, nor shall you testify in a dispute so as to turn aside after many to pervert justice. You shall not show partiality to a poor man in his dispute. If you meet your enemy's ox or his donkey going astray, you shall surely bring it back to him again. If you see the donkey of one who hates you lying under its burden, and you would refrain from helping it, you shall surely help him with it. That's the verse of the day. Here's your pocket sermon for the day. Don't be so focused on your own safety that you totally disregard everybody else's safety. If you see somebody on the side of the road and you think they genuinely need help and you can help them, then you should help them. And I've struggled with this because honestly, in like a big metropolitan area, which I've had to live in for jobs in times past, you literally can't stop and help everybody broken down on the side of the road because you literally would never get to work. Like you couldn't have a job. That would be your full-time job. But when you can, when you have the opportunity, or when it looks like they actually right now need help, don't be so focused on your own safety that you disregard the safety of others. What does Jesus say is the first and second commandment? Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one, and you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. This is the first commandment. And the second like it is this: you shall love your neighbor as yourself. There is no other commandment greater than these. Very simply, men, and very powerfully, love God, love yourself, love your neighbor. Have a blessed day. What is going on, gunfighters? Saddle up for part 2 of Truck Guns. If you haven't listened to part 1, that was on handguns. This one's going to be on the PCC, the pistol caliber carbine. So saddle up for this episode of Gunfighter Life, where we talk about guns, gunfighting, tactics, and in this series, truck guns. The right way with God Almighty at the center, Judeo-Christian values, and real-world first-hand experience. Talked about my bio in part 1. This happens to be the first episode you've ever listened to. Just real quick, been blessed by God first and foremost to be a Christian, military, combat veteran, law enforcement, different assignments, private contractor, commander of a tactical team to stop active shooters, U.S. Marine Corps urban warfare instructor, and blessed to do many other things. Let's get quickly into this episode. The pistol caliber carbine. Pistol caliber carbines have a lot going for them in this arena. One could be that they may, depending on your normal everyday carry, assume this truck gun thing is in addition to your everyday carry, right? In addition to you being a man, having your Bible, having your EDC knife, your fighting handgun, all that stuff. And this is in addition to your EDC, not a replacement for. Anyway, you could have your PCC set up to take the same mags as your everyday carry. For instance, your 320, you could have a PCC that takes 320 magazines. Or your Beretta and your PCC that takes Beretta magazines. Or I guess if you want your Glock and your PCC that takes Glock magazines. Just kidding, there's nothing wrong with that. And Glock magazines are probably the most common out there. So that's a big advantage. You can have your normal carry handgun and you could have your PCC loaded up. The same magazines, and then if something should happen, you have that cross compatibility. Not only the same caliber, hopefully, but the same magazines. That could be a big advantage. Also, an advantage of the PCC in this arena, especially. If you've ever done any kind of tactical training where you're shooting from a vehicle, where you're shooting inside a small room, guns can be really loud, to state the obvious. They can be really loud when you shoot outside. They can be really loud. Go shoot a normal rifle at an indoor range. Now imagine that if that is your smallest thing you've ever shot a gun in a much smaller area, like a closet or a bathroom or a vehicle. I don't advise you shoot your PCC without hearing protection. However, it is much less damaging than a rifle in the same area. That is an advantage here. If you're talking about this, if you happen to still be in the vehicle and you are shooting out of the vehicle, less blast, less noise. Again, it's still going to be loud, but not as loud. Even usually less loud than your handgun because you have that longer barrel. That pressure is going to be less. Also, another big advantage when compared to a handgun, you're getting better ballistics. Even if, talking about your truck gun, your full-size fighting handgun, let's say 5 inches. That's what I consider a full-size handgun. You take the same box of ammo, Spear Gold Dot 147 grain, G2, good load. You cut it in half. 25 rounds of 25 rounds. You shoot it at the same chronograph, one with your handgun, one with your PCC. You're going to get more velocity, which equals more energy, right? Force equals mass times velocity squared. You're going to get more, even out of the same box of ammo, out of the PCC. So it's got better ballistics than your handgun. Also, maybe capacity. Even if you've got a full-size fighting handgun in general, even with a extended mag, you're probably, despite people doing a bunch of posts on social media, you're probably not running around with your handgun, even your full-size one in your vehicle, with a 33-round mag. They just don't handle well. You can absolutely have a 33-round mag in a PCC and it'll handle just fine. So capacity may be a plus there. Also, and here is the big one, right? Here's kind of the big advantage to me of a PCC over a handgun. It's still a long gun. It may not be a rifle, it may not be an intermediate cartridge or a full power cartridge. However, it's still a long gun, and it still has the advantages of a long gun. Most notably, shootability. For instance, I'm confident in my abilities as a professional firearms instructor. I mentioned that in the bio, but among other things, FBI firearms instructor. I could take an average 12-year-old girl, and if she's willing to listen, I could have her hitting a man-sized target easily with a PCC at 50 yards in an hour of instruction. Most professional police officers have a hard time consistently hitting a man-sized silhouette at 50 yards with a handgun. Professional police officers. I was a police officer. LAPD, I worked regular assignments, more specialized assignments. I've also been a law enforcement instructor. I don't say that gleefully. I say that as a reality. Most cops are not professional gunfighters. They are administrators. There are exceptions, but most are administrators. Ask how much time they spend shooting versus how much time they spend with a pencil in their hand or a pen or in front of a keyboard. The FBI is the Federal Bureau of Investigation, not the Federal Bureau of Gunfighters. Anyway, the point being, PCCs being a long gun are far easier to shoot in general. Easier to get hits at 25, 50 yards. Have more points of contact. A long gun is more forgiving of errors in marksmanship training and mastering of the fundamentals. They are more forgiving than a handgun. The less perishable skill being good with a long gun than with a handgun. Handguns in general are the hardest gun to master. So the big one to me is shootability. That's a big one. Also better ballistics and all that stuff, but shot placement. And a PCC is a lot easier to get hits, especially at range, than a handgun. Here's another big one. Optics. And red dots on handguns, I was against them for a little while. I was kind of a Luddite. I was wrong. They are a force multiplier on a handgun. They have gotten to where they are rugged enough and robust enough. You skew that line a little bit. Big fan of optics on fighting handguns. Good quality optics. But on a PCC, you can also put an optic. And not only a red dot. A red dot would probably be my go-to. You could also put on a LPVO. And what I like less than that is a red dot with a magnifier. Again, if you think you might want to shoot out to range, you can put a far bigger optic on a PCC. Also, by the very nature, the modern way, except for competition shooters, which have been mounting optics on handguns for a lot longer than the average police officer, military person, they kind of mount them a different way for open division. But I'm talking the modern way that we see a lot for carry is the optic, the red dot, and I don't even use red dots, I use green triangles most of the time for my fighting handguns, at least at this point. But let's just call it a red dot. That's getting slammed back and forth on that slide with a lot of force. So if I'm going to mount an optic on a fighting handgun, it's going to be a good quality optic because of the amount of abuse that it is taking time after time. You're in general getting far less abuse with an optic mounted on a PCC. because it's not getting that much abuse. It's not getting slammed back with that much G-force, that many newtons, right? Every time after time, round after round. So I'm a big fan of optics on a handgun, but it had better be a good quality optic if it's a fighting handgun. I'm much more comfortable with, let's say, a more affordable optic on a PCC because it's not getting the same abuse round after round. I'm totally comfortable with something like a Holosun 507 or something on a PCC. So the cost of the optic, and you can also get a bigger optic, which helps with speed, a bigger field of view. Also, let's just talk about cost. PCCs are cheaper than a lot of other options. PCCs are pretty affordable. Because handgun rounds are low pressure rounds and you have such a big area to work with, these are some of the most affordable of the things we're going to talk about. Now, I am both for and against cheap PCCs for a truck gun. And probably not for the reason that you think. Here's why I am for them. If it is what you can afford, I think first and foremost your EDC should be squared away. After that, if you want to start looking at truck guns and you decide that a PCC is your choice, you're going to rock the PCC for your truck gun, for your amplification of force, your ability to project more force farther. Because that's what all firearms really are, an ability to project force. This is going to be your force multiplier, the PCC. And what you can afford is a high point carbine. Or what you can afford is a Kel-Tec Sub 2000. Both of those can be really good PCCs. Because again, it's a low pressure round, simple blowback design. A lot of the Kel-Tec stuff I wouldn't recommend. They're a good company, but a lot of their stuff, they do a lot of risky, complicated mechanical stuff, but these aren't one of them, like the Kel-Tec Sub 2K. Or the high point carbine. I'm not a big fan of the high point handguns, not because they don't work, but because they don't work as a handgun. The whole point of them is to be able to carry them on you, and they're so big as to be kind of ridiculous. But the high point carbine is not so. They're simple, straight blowback, which, if you don't know what that means, they're just a very simple, probably as simple an operating system as you can get in a semi-auto. And they're affordable. And I'm not going to hate them because they're affordable. If that's what you can afford for your truck gun, I am in favor of these. Here's why I'm not in favor of these. If you can afford something better, there are far better PCCs than a high point carbine and then a Sub 2000. And I'm not for the argument, well, I'm just going to throw a piece of junk in my car because if somebody steals it, then I'm not going to care. That's kind of like saying I'm going to drive a piece of crap car, not because that's what I can afford, but because I don't want a nice car because if somebody steals it, I won't care. Or I'm going to live in a tent because I don't want to live in a house because if somebody comes and burns my house down, I won't care so much if they burn down my tent. I'll just buy another one at Walmart for $40. You're talking about something potentially that your life is going to depend on. So, again, I'm not a gun collector. This is not gun collector life. If you want to collect guns, that's fine. If you have a bunch of really nice guns at home in a safe that you're probably never going to use for defense because they're locked in a safe, and you're probably not going to have time to get to them, putting a cheap gun in your car because, I'm not going to care about it, I'm not for that philosophy. If it's a gun you're going to trust your life to, like your EDC gun or your truck gun, get the best you can get. I would not have like a high point carbine in my car and then a really nice PCC in the safe. What sense does that make? So I'm both for and against the cheap PCC, but an advantage of the PCC is you can make them cheaply and reliably. High point is a high point carbine is a good, reliable PCC. It's not as good as other PCCs. Probably the best one is the MP5, and I'm a big fan of the MP5, or the civilian version, I think it's the SK5, because you're probably not getting a full auto for this. There are other really good PCCs. Consider the Sub 2K better than a high point. It's lighter, it's handier. It also folds, which may be a big deal for you. Maybe you want that urban camouflage. Maybe you want to put it in a duffel bag with, hoodie over it, so people just assume it's an old gym bag with a hoodie on it. Or it needs to fit under a seat or something like that. There's also the new Smith & Wesson. I would say wait for the 3-year mark. If you don't know, I like stuff to be out and proven, but it's getting there. There's also the entire menagerie of AR-based PCCs. Not all of these are created equal. One of the better versions of this, I would consider the CMMG. It doesn't just use a straight blowback, which can give you quite a bit of recoil, surprisingly, because you have a big piece of reciprocating mass in there. But they use a radial delayed system in the bolt. So the CMMG pistol caliber carbines, they, I think, are potentially really good option and not nearly the cost of, let's say, an HK, but really, really good quality. There's also the kind of Build-A-Bear kits to turn your handgun, making your handgun the stuffing and putting a bunch of stuff around it. Build-A-Bear PCC. There's all these kind of kits, the Roni kits, all these other kits. And we may talk about those more in the PDW episode, the personal defense weapon episode. There's all different versions of these PCCs. This is not really, I don't want to turn this into a discussion on the best PCC, but a good quality PCC that meets your needs. I guess we should talk about caliber. Probably 9mm. Why? It's affordable. It's got low recoil. It's going to have even less recoil unless you do something crazy in the PCC. Fast follow-up shots. Also, you're probably carrying 9mm as your carry gun. You might want that interchangeability. But there is a real case to be made here for the bigger, beefier rounds. For instance, going back to the high point, if that's what you can afford, they make the high point carbine in 10mm. If you can afford to train a bunch in 10mm, I'd say you probably can afford a better PCC. But the fact stands, they make the high point carbine and many other carbines in 10mm. 10mm really skews that line. More powerful than most common rounds. If you're the 45 guy, there's plenty of PCCs in 45. Also, a really intriguing one for this, 357 SIG. 357 SIG is kind of a niche round. I have a 357 SIG. I've carried it for a time. I have hunted with it successfully. 357 SIG is a very underappreciated round in my opinion. It kind of blurs that line here. It's, again, more powerful than most common handgun rounds, like your big three. It gives you a little bit more range, a little bit more point blank range. It's maybe a little bit of a hipster round, a little bit of a niche round that is not cheap, but it is a good round, and you may consider it here, especially somewhere like Canada. If you're not aware, Canada has some laws where if it's a rifle round, you're limited to 5 rounds. If it's a PCC, you can have 10 rounds. And you get into this interesting thing. Do I want 5 rounds of 7.62 by 39 or 5.56, or do I want 10 rounds of 357 SIG or 10mm? But I think there's some merit here for looking at a more powerful cartridge. I think 9mm wins the race by far for the de facto defensive handgun caliber of our time, but this is not a handgun. It's a long gun. It's a bigger, heavier gun, which means you're not giving up as much when you go to a bigger, more powerful cartridge. So there's that to consider. Here's a few issues with the PCC, especially here in America. Because of what happened with the whole pistol brace thing where it stands now, there was a time where they made a lot of sense, because you could get around the whole SBR thing and you could have a light handy, let's say quasi PDW, a really light handy vehicle gun. And I think they were awesome in that kind of in-between where you don't want something as big as a full-size rifle or even a full-size carbine, 16-inch, but you want something bigger and more shootable than a handgun. Well, unless something happens and changes with that, we don't have that option anymore. So you can't just put the pistol brace on it. So now you got to run a 16-inch gun. If you're going to run a 16-inch barrel gun, why not just go with a intermediate, your more common actual rifle rounds? I just did an entire episode on PCCs versus regular carbines, like a regular intermediate carbine, like a 5.56 or a 7.62 by 39. If you're going to carry a gun, they generally weigh about as much as an M4 a lot of times. Maybe not the Kel-Tec, but a lot of them, like a high point carbine. You're getting a gun that big, why not just get an M4? There is no comparison. I talked about this in that episode, PCC versus regular carbines. There is no comparison. Apples and oranges, right? No legit comparison. You're talking apples and oranges. A pistol caliber carbine is not an intermediate cartridge. There's a reason that no mainline infantry in the world sends the majority of its infantry, and I was an infantryman, into battle with PCCs or with handguns, right? They do it with intermediate cartridges, maybe a full power rifle cartridge, but they don't do it with 9mm carbines, right? There's a reason for that. It is not an equal to an actual carbine. And if you're stuck with a gun that has to be as big as an actual modern carbine, like an M4 or an AK, why wouldn't you just go that route? The PCC is going to be better ballistically than a comparable handgun because you get the longer barrel, the better ballistics, but it's not going to be as good as a 7.62x39 or a 5.56 a lot of times at the task that you want it to do. It is going to be a little bit quieter, but if you're talking about that, I don't think it's worth it, and that really stinks that kind of got taken away. But it is what it is. The other thing you could do is have nothing on it at all and just have this thing just kind of have hanging out there in space and try and operate it without a buttstock, which kind of sucks. You have just the buffer tube, which again still kind of sucks. Have some kind of sling attachment where you push forward on the sling, like a single point sling wrapped behind your shoulder that you push forward on. That still kind of sucks. They're all okay. Like you could get the HK SP5 and just put the sling on it and push it out, and it's maybe better than a handgun, but it's pretty unwieldy. And I would say if you're good with a handgun, you're not gaining a lot. And the other thing you could do is register it and make it an SBR. But here's what sucks about that. I don't know if you know this about SBRs, but you're supposed to get and give a letter saying that you're going to cross state lines every time you cross state lines with an SBR. If this is a truck gun, that kind of sucks, right? Because especially me, if you don't know, my wife and I live as neo-nomads. Am I going to write a letter every 2 days or every week and wait for the ATF to get back to me and say, okay, write a letter saying, hey, I'm going to Oregon, I'm going to Washington, I'm going to Alaska. Oh, now I'm back in Idaho. What happens if they don't get that letter in time and something were to happen with the PCC or I get stopped or pulled over? Right? That's a big deal. If you live, like let's say you live in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex of Texas and you never really leave that area, don't ever plan on bugging out outside that area or anything, because a big reason I think we like the truck gun and the preparedness thing is that we might have to bug out. If you're only ever going to stay in that area, or if you're like a licensed security guy and you're going to operate in a certain AO, then maybe you want to go that route of an SBR. But that's really one of the things that stinks about going the SBR route with a PCC or even a carbine is that you're not supposed to cross state lines with it unless you do it in writing. So it kind of stinks that kind of takes a lot of the appeal out of the PCC. I'm not saying you shouldn't go the PCC route. Again, there's still some advantages. But a big one, I think, got taken away with the pistol brace thing. And again, the big thing is if you're going to carry something as big or potentially as big as a long gun, why not carry a proper either rifle or shotgun? Again, riding shotgun is a thing for a reason. Shotguns have historically been used even long after the rifle era to protect vehicles from looters, from robbers, from murderers. I'm a big fan of the shotgun. If you're going to carry something that big and heavy, why not just go to a full-powered long gun? Like, there is no comparison between the effectiveness of a PCC in any caliber, really, over like a full payload of double-aught buck out of a 12-gauge. Or a deep penetrator slug or even a straight Foster slug, but let alone a Bernanke slug. You talk about the effectiveness, shooting into other vehicles, because if it's a vehicle gun, there's probably a good chance you may have to shoot into somebody else's vehicle. Or something like a 7.62x39 AK. If you're dealing with something of that mass, why not go with the actual rifle or shotgun? That's my big thing on the PCC. And here's the other thing, you talk about affordability. You can get some pretty affordable PCCs, but you can also get some really good affordable pump-action shotguns. And I'll be the first to admit a shotgun, with slugs or buckshot is not as much fun to shoot as a PCC, but are you doing it to look cool on Instagram, or are you doing it as an actual life-saving, practical tool for survival? Anyway, I don't want to come down hard on the PCC. It's certainly a better option than only having a handgun or sitting there and sucking your thumb when you're getting carjacked. Right there, it's a much better option than a lot of other options. It is a better option even than a big full-size fighting handgun. However, if you're going with a full-size 16-inch barrel long gun, there are other long guns. Also, to touch on it briefly, I'm mostly thinking of the modern semi-automatic PCC, but they're not the only game in town. You have what you might call your OG or your old school PCCs, talking about like your lever action 357 Magnum or 44 Magnum. Now you talk about a 44 Magnum in a lever action carbine, now you're in a different ballpark. You do have a lot more round per round effectiveness. However, you don't have the rate of fire. Lever actions are fast, especially if you train with them. Go watch a cowboy action match, but they're not as fast as a semi-auto. They don't have the capacity of a semi-auto. They're not as quick to reload as a semi-auto, but they do have better round per round capability. And if you're talking about a crossover, you want to hunt with it, you have it in your truck a lot for hunting and game management, but also if something were to happen, you want a little bit more firepower than your handgun, then yeah, I mean a 44 Magnum lever action or a 357 Magnum lever action, that is also an option. That wasn't really what I was thinking of on this episode, but they are a thing, and you may decide that is your best option for a PCC. They are still pistol caliber carbines, and they're kind of like the old school pistol caliber carbines. You may decide for you that is a good option. So, a real brief summary. The PCC, definitely a step up in firepower over a handgun. They can also be made very affordably and reliably. They're also quieter, usually, than a rifle in a similar barrel length, on a traditional rifle caliber. You can also have the added benefit of compatibility with the same ammo and maybe even same mags as your carry gun. Downsides. If you're dealing with a full-size gun, again, we'll talk about PDWs in a future episode, God willing, so make sure you're like, subscribed, and following the show. But if you're dealing with a full-size 16-inch barrel long gun, why wouldn't you have a proper full-power long gun? Meaning like a pump-action shotgun, 18-inch shotgun, because it's only 2 inches longer in the barrel. Or why not have an M4 or an AK-47 variant with a lot more power and a lot more effectiveness and a lot more point-blank range? That's kind of your downside. Those are some thoughts on the PCC for a truck gun. This will be part 2. Again, hopefully you're like, subscribe, following the show, whatever vernacular they use on whatever platform you're listening on. If you like more of this, if you want to ask direct questions, if you're on Spotify, there's a thing to scroll down and ask questions. Or if you want to contact me, go to the Patreon page. There's a Patreon link in the show notes. Most of the stuff on there is insider content, obviously, for patrons. However, if you scroll down a bit, there's a post that says questions. You can ask me a question. You don't even have to be a patron. You can sign up for Patreon for $1. But if you don't even want to give me $1, you can literally go on there, scroll down, and ask me a question. And if it's a good question and I get to it, I will answer it on the air. So if you want me to answer a question, if you want to be part of our insider chat, then you do have to become a patron. And we talk about stuff like this all the time. Actually went back and edited episode 1 and added parts to it based on feedback from the patrons. Iron sharpens iron. The Bible says, as iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another. I'm blessed to be a part of that. If you want to be part of that, and if you want to support the show, consider becoming a patron. But either way, you can get on there and ask me a question. And again, make sure you're following, subscribing, if you want to hear more about the series of truck guns. The carbine, we'll probably get into a little bit of AK versus AR for this. We'll talk about the shotgun. God willing, we'll talk about all of this and the PDWs and maybe some, let's say, wild cards. We'll see where it goes. I said maybe. So the Bible says, let your yes be yes and your no be no. But I don't see any problem with saying maybe. Come up with some good wild cards. Anyway, with that said, I appreciate you listening. I'm humbled that you give me some of your time. as a thank you, let's go into the tactical tip of the day. As important as ammo selection is for your carry gun, you should also be very judicious about ammo selection for your pistol caliber carbine. It is not the same thing. Defensive ammunition in, let's say, the 9mm and other calibers, but most notably the 9mm, has come a long way in the past decade and a half, leaps and bounds. Most of that R&D has gone into full-size fighting handgun, combat handguns, because it's mostly done for law enforcement. Not all, but mostly for law enforcement, federal agencies, local agencies, the FBI. And there's a balancing act in hollow point defensive ammunition. If it expands not at all, it will over-penetrate and waste its energy and perhaps be a danger to people behind the person you're shooting. If it overexpands, and a lot of people don't think about this, if it overexpands, then it will not penetrate potentially deep enough to reach vital organs. That is velocity based. You don't believe me? Take a hollow point face down and drop it on the table. It will not expand. You get to just the right velocity, generally designed for a full-size fighting handgun, which is why I'm a big fan of carrying CCW, a full-size fighting handgun. It should hit that sweet spot. If you drive it too fast, it may over-expand and not penetrate deep enough. So although in a PCC, you're going to get more velocity, depending on the projectile, that could be a bad thing. You could actually do less as far as stopping a threat than you would with your handgun because it expands too quickly. That's a thing. That can be a thing. So some projectiles could do well for both. But don't assume that because it's a good carry round that it's good PCC round. Also, when you start getting into the higher velocities, and we can be talking substantially higher in a PCC, there's obviously full metal jackets, which I'm not recommending. There's the carry ammunition, and then there's kind of this other category we don't see a lot, but you may want to consider for this application, and that's a soft point. You'll see a lot of soft points in rifles, but you get into this intermediate kind of realm, not intermediate cartridges, but like intermediate between a regular handgun and an intermediate cartridge for a rifle, where you're talking higher velocities. And there is jacketed soft point. And you'll see loads like this. That may be a better option for the PCC. You have to do your own research. I'm not here to think for you and tell you what you should put in your gun. Want to ask me more specific stuff, again, I've told you how you can get a hold of me or ask a question, but don't think again that because it's a great micro 9mm load that it's going to be a good PCC load. And for this, you may really consider something we don't often consider, and that's the semi-jacketed soft point ammunition. That's your tactical tip of the day. Your tactical verse of the day. Hopefully what you've been waiting for. Ascribe greatness to our God. He is the rock. His work is perfect. For all his ways are justice, a God of truth and without injustice. Righteous and upright is he. And that was so good. How about another? It's from the end of Deuteronomy, the latter part of Deuteronomy. And the Lord, he is the one who goes before you. He will be with you. He will not leave you nor forsake you. Do not fear. Do not be dismayed. I have a saying I like to say for myself and fellow warriors by God's grace. Know thy God. Know thyself. Know thy weapon. You should have a knowledge of those things, but first and foremost is God. The battle is the Lord's. If you're on the right side, if you're fighting for the right reasons, you should know when you can lawfully use lethal force. Because we're talking about serious stuff here. I'm not talking about shooting steel targets on Instagram. I'm talking about potential use of deadly force. That's a weighty, heavy matter. But if you're on the right side of that, I have confidence in God. Whether it's a PCC or my bare hands, or the jawbone of a donkey. If God is with me, what can stand against me? That is more important. With that, thanks for listening, and have a blessed day.